I don't like the Velvet Underground without Nico because to me, Lou Reed is a bad singer and he is kind of annoying as a vocalist. What's up, Bomb Squad? This is the God Bombs, back again with another review. This time it's my top 10 favorite noise rock albums. Now, I recently posted my list of top 10 industrial rock. Industrial rock tends to be more on the grid, more mechanical, more precise. Noise rock is loose, sloppy, noisy, crazy, chaotic. It's more jam-oriented. It's more improvisational. And it's mostly rooted in the scene that sprung out of New York City, starting with the Velvet Underground in the late 60s, bands that kind of influenced punk music. It's experimental, it's loud, it's crazy, it's dangerous, it's edgy, and I love it. Noise rock is one of my biggest influences as a musician. You can hear it in some of the music of my band, the God Bombs, and it's definitely something that influenced me a lot growing up in New York City. I grew up in the shadow of a lot of these legendary noise rock artists. I just want to kick right into it. The first on my list of honorable mentions is Japanese noise rock band Boris, with their collaboration with Merzbow, the legendary godfather of noise. Masami Akita, aka Merzbow, who was a pioneer of noise music. In this case, Boris and Merzbow did a live album together called Rock Dream. This album is awesome. It's sprawling, it's huge, it's very long, it's very psychedelic. It takes your mind on a whole journey. It flows into different directions. It's very cohesive as a whole. You have the rock band Boris kind of jamming out in really cool directions, and the noise artist Merzbow adding his noise and textures to it, swirling chaotic sounds over this kind of droning freeform rock style. It's a lot better than I'm making it sound. Definitely check out Rock Dream by Boris and Merzbow. Next up, we have another Japanese artist, Melt Banana Fetch. Melt Banana is a Japanese noise rock band. The album Fetch is probably my favorite album by them. The guitars are super textured. There's a lot of chaos and like digital and really cool effects pedals going on. The guitarist is amazing in this band. I actually saw them live back when I was in college. They played with another band called An Albatross, and they were awesome live, super high energy. The guitarist has like a whole rack of pedals, and he does really crazy sounds. It doesn't sound like any other band I've ever heard. So definitely check out Melt Banana. The singer has like this high-pitched kind of yipping voice. It really works well with the music. I can see how it could become irritating a little bit, but it definitely works with the music, and they have a very unique sound. It's almost like cute and fun, but chaotic at the same time. And my last honorable mention is The Locust, Plague Soundscapes. This is a very short album. It's short and brutal. The songs are mostly like a minute or less, and they're just totally spastic freakouts. The band all dress up in these crazy jumpsuits that look like locusts, and they play awesome synthesizer riffs and stuff, and it's very technical actually, but the end result of it just sounds like pure noise because they're just doing these crazy blast beats and these crazy riffs in odd time signatures. This band could be considered like somewhere between grindcore and spaz metal, as they used to call it, and noise rock, but I'm including it here because it's very experimental, it's very edgy, and it's very noisy overall. And this album is probably their best example of their sound. They have a number of other good albums. Another shout out would be Safety Second, Body Last, which is an EP that they did. I like that one too because the songs are a little bit longer and more sprawling and drawn out, and they have some sections that are slower actually. The Locust is definitely known for their fast-paced songs, but on that EP they really let things stretch out a little bit. This is my cat, Sage. Say hi. This brings us to our actual list. Coming in at number 10 is a Brooklyn-based band called Sightings. Now, I have the honor of having seen Sightings live before, and it was truly chaotic and pure noise. These guys have really captured the sound of New York City. All the noise that you hear in the subway tunnels, the train, the grates, and the weird hissing sounds, and like the crazy buzzing, and all just the sound of New York as a whole. I love a lot of their albums. I like the album Arrived in Gold a lot because it's more warm and analog sounding, and it sounds a little bit more classic, like old school. But I'm gonna go with their 2007 album Through the Panama. It's a lot of texture-based stuff. It's a guitar, bass, and drum trio, but it doesn't sound anything like guitar, bass, and drums. The guitarist wiles out and does these crazy noise sounds, and his vocals are very like no wave sounding or like noise rock sounding, very kind of like atonal vocals where he's almost doing like a spoken word beatnik type sound over the music. That's another thing that characterizes this genre, is it really arose out of that beatnik poetry tradition that you heard from artists like Bob Dylan, who grew up in New York City, or artists like Sonic Youth. Noise rock kind of inherits that beatnik tradition of like spoken word, and you hear that in the vocal delivery of the band Sightings on this album. Definitely check out Through the Panama by Sightings. Up next at number 9, we have Lightning Bolt. This is a duo from Providence, Rhode Island, and they were famously on a record label called Load Records. Load Records kind of represents the resurgence of noise that happened in the early 2000s, and when I was like really young, that was a popular thing that I grew up with like these noise bands that were coming out in the early 2000s. Lightning Bolt was definitely one of the most prominent of those bands, and even though it's only 2 people, they create a huge sound. Now this band is probably the most metal sounding out of all the bands I'm going to cover today, but it's metal in like a Black Sabbath sense, but just like way faster and way crazier, way noisier. They have awesome crushing riffs. I had the pleasure of seeing these guys live performing underneath a bridge in Brooklyn, New York. Super guerrilla style, off the grid, totally illegal show, and people were just going crazy moshing under the bridge. It was awesome. They had a huge stack of amplifiers, and these guys were famous for performing in the middle of the crowd. They never perform on a stage. They're always right in the middle of the crowd, and people just like go crazy around them like a tornado. Their music is very psychedelic. It's very heavy. It's kind of twangy. It has a bit of a bluesiness or a jazziness to it, but it's pure noise at the same time. It's very chaotic and distorted. It sounds huge and crushing, and it just sucks you in and kind of drones on, and like it's like repetitive, but it changes at the same time, and it just takes you on a journey. So I definitely recommend checking out Hypermagic Mountain. Up next at number 8, we have Daughters, You Won't Get What You Want. I love the album cover. It instantly feels sinister. It's like a painting of a white face, but it looks kind of nightmarish and creepy. And this band is dark. It's probably the darkest album on this list. It definitely drones on in like a very sinister way. It feels eerie. It feels oppressive. It feels claustrophobic. It feels ominous. And I like that about this album. I think it's a more kind of industrial tinged noise rock album. Pounding drums, heavy vocals, really heavy music, but then there's occasional like flourishes of synthesizer or piano, and it kind of adds another dimension of melody to the noise rock here. I definitely recommend checking out this band, Daughters. They started out as a more of a grindcore band, but this is their last album, and I think it's their best album. It's the most like noise rock oriented, but it has a modern edge to it because it came out in 2018. It came out on Ipecac Records, and Ipecac is definitely a great label for experimental rock music. I recommend checking out that label overall. There will be a lot of artists that I'll cover that came out on Ipecac Records. That's the record label of Mike Patton, who's famous for being the vocalist of Faith No More, but he also has a bunch of other projects such as Tomahawk, Fantomas, and many others, which are kind of noise rock adjacent. He definitely has released a bunch of great albums on his label because he's an artist himself, so he thinks like an artist. He only releases stuff that's really like top quality and has integrity to it. Up next at number 7, we have Liars, Drums Not Dead. Liars is a band from Brooklyn, New York originally, but the singer is actually from Australia, and you can hear that accent in his singing. He has an amazing voice, and this is the album where he really started doing more falsetto with his vocal, and I love his falsetto. It's really pretty actually, but in kind of a gritty way, if that makes sense. Liars is a very experimental band. All their albums are super different. They're one of my favorite noise rock bands. I had the pleasure of seeing them live. It was an awesome show. I saw them on the tour for this album, Drums Not Dead. It was truly magical. Like, the show just took me to another dimension. It's in my top 10 shows I've ever seen in my life. And the singer is super tall, so when he performs, he just puts on a spectacle. He's a very good performer. And Drums Not Dead is cool because it has this dreamy, ethereal quality to it. They recorded it in a studio in Germany, and it has this big, reverby, metallic sound to it throughout the album. A lot of the album is just really about the drums and the droning sounds of the guitars. It's very minimalistic, but it's very pretty at the same time. I would say that this album is the most beautiful sounding of all the albums on my list. Drums Not Dead is a vibe. Also, their album They Were Wrong So We Drowned is another really cool concept album. It's the one that came out before this one in 2004. It's witch themed. It's themed on the witch trials. It has some really cool concept music on it as well. It's a little bit more spooky and creepy. But the reason I picked Drums Not Dead is because that album just stuck with me. And there's something about that album that just evokes memories in a way that very few albums do. So I'm going to go with Drums Not Dead for my list here. Coming in at number 6 is the Butthole Surfers with their album Rembrandt Pussyhorse. It's their second studio album. This band is characterized by experimental rock. The singer, Gibby Haynes, was iconic with his wild performances, famously held a shotgun and pointed at the audience back in the Lollapalooza era. They often had projections playing behind the band, which featured crazy, wild videos that were disturbing and psychedelic. The music of the Butthole Surfers ranges a lot. It's kind of comical at times, absurd, almost Dadaistic. And this album in particular embodies their sound, and I like it because it's really experimental and weird, but it's consistently cool and awesome. Some of their songs just really don't hit for me. In fact, a lot of their music really doesn't hit for me at all, but this group is definitely a pioneering noise rock group and psychedelic group, and so they have to be featured on my list here at number 6. This album is my favorite by them. I think it's the most consistent one throughout. It's kind of dark at times and bizarre. There's some really cool organs and weird sounds on here, and it doesn't have that typical butt rock sound that a lot of their music unfortunately does. So definitely going to pick this one for my number 6 noise rock albums. Up next at number 5, we have Swans, Children of God. Swans is another New York band. Are you noticing a pattern here? New York is synonymous with noise rock. Swans is probably the most gothic sounding of any of these bands. Michael Gira has this kind of southern twang to his voice that's really cool. Deep voice, beautiful singer. He also on this album is accompanied by his girlfriend at the time named Jarbo, who's a female vocalist. I love this album because it has that interplay of male and female vocals. Depending on the song, you'll get the female singing or the male singing, and I like that about this album. This album to me was almost reminiscent of the Downward Spiral by 9 Inch Nails, because you'll get like a really heavy song that's like crushing and noisy, and then it'll suddenly have this really quiet, beautiful song. Like the song In My Garden is just gorgeous and ethereal, and you have Jarbo singing in this kind of beautiful voice with the reverb. And this album was made in 1986, so it has that 80s production with the big reverby snares and stuff, but it totally holds up. It sounds fresh, it sounds current to me, and it just holds up with the test of time. I feel like Children of God has great songwriting on it. It's memorable. It's definitely showcases a range for the band in terms of having dynamics, loud moments, and then soft, beautiful moments. So Children of God is where we start to see how noise rock can have this like full range of emotions. So I definitely recommend checking out Children of God by the Swans. And Swans in general is a great band. They've continued on up until the present day with newer sounding albums and stuff, but I think this 80s album is definitely a classic. Up next at number 4, we have Big Black. This is a band by the famous recording engineer Steve Albini. In this case, Albini is the vocalist and guitar player, and there's another guitar player as well, plus a drum machine. Big Black was famous for using a drum machine as the third member of their band. And the drum machine really works, though. In this case, it has these repetitive blast beats, and it's just awesome. The two guitars together create a very textured sound. Steve Albini was quoted as saying he wants to create sounds with his guitar that don't even sound like a guitar, and you wonder how they were created. He definitely achieved that on this album. I love the song Passing Complexion. That's one of my favorite guitar tones of all time. Also, of course, Big Black's biggest single, Kerosene, is also on this album. And it's just a classic album from the 80s. It's ahead of its time. It sounds kind of punk. It's very upbeat and in your face, but at the same time, it has like an industrial kind of metallic sound to it. And of course, the noisy guitars. Overall, it's definitely a noise rock album, but it's one of the more industrial sounding albums on my list. And Steve Albini would go on to produce famously many bands, but the most famous, of course, would be his involvement in producing Nirvana's In Utero album, which will appear later on our list. Steve Albini died recently, just this past year, so I want to say rest in peace to Steve Albini. Albini was involved in recording so many bands over the years. He was famous for recording artists for as little as $300. He said he'll work within your budget. It doesn't matter how big of a producer he is. He'll work with any band as long as he likes the band, and as long as you can come up with like $300, he's yours for the day. So Albini was very old school in that sense. A rumor has it that part of the reason he died is because he was addicted to espresso. So I think he was like chugging coffee, and he was just a maniac in the studio. The guy lived and breathed music, and I definitely respect him. But he's kind of has this manic workaholic energy to him. And actually, Albini famously had a feud with Ministry frontman Al Jorgensen back in the day because they're both from Chicago. So Big Black was kind of the noise rock band from Chicago, and Ministry was like the industrial rock. And they were like feuding, and Albini had some pretty negative things to say about Ministry back in the press back then. But I'm a huge fan of Big Black and Ministry. I'm happy to include Big Black as number 4 on my list of best noise rock albums. Up next at number 3, we have maybe a controversial pick, which is Sonic Youth, Bad Moon Rising. This is the second studio album from Sonic Youth, released in 1985. This is only controversial because of the album choice. Obviously, Sonic Youth is well known as one of the best noise rock bands in the world, if not the most famous. However, this album is maybe not their most popular album. It's not Daydream Nation. It's a pure noise rock experience. Each song flows into the next. There's awesome, distorted, haunting sounds on here. It's very spooky sounding, unlike a lot of other Sonic Youth albums. And that's one thing I love about it. It even has a jack-o'-lantern with a flaming head, like a scarecrow on the cover. I love the cover art. I think it's iconic. They even have a song on there called Halloween. There's another song on there called Satan is Boring, and I love that tongue-in-cheek kind of take on the spookiness, but also like that song actually sounds really demonic and kind of scary. This is like definitely Sonic Youth's darkest album, most chaotic, most haunting, and to me as an industrial goth person, it's like their most beautiful, ethereal, awesome album. I love this album, Bad Moon Rising. I love the title. I love the whole aesthetic of the album. Kim Gordon's vocals are beautiful. Thurston Moore, obviously, again with that male-female interplay, just like we saw on the Swans album. I love how there's dual vocals with this band as well. They were a famous rock and roll couple. Unfortunately, after many, many years of marriage, they finally called it quits because Kim Gordon said that Thurston Moore was cheating on her. So that was a big kind of a loss for indie rock fans around the world. They were like the model couple that everybody looked up to because they managed to stay together. And unfortunately, because of that infidelity, Sonic Youth is no more. But I do want to give a shout out to Kim Gordon's latest album, which was phenomenal. And that album would have been on my list here. It's so good. But it has like trap beats on it, and it kind of blurs the line. I would almost say that it's its own genre. It's not really even noise rock because there's not like live drumming on it and stuff. It's like trap beats and industrial beats and kind of like awesome production and just distortion. And you know, that album is phenomenal though. Up next at number 2, the second greatest noise rock album of all time, in my humble opinion, is Nirvana, In Utero. Now, I know this is going to be controversial. People are going to be saying, oh, Nirvana's not a noise rock artist, blah, blah, blah. They're grunge, they're pop, they're this or that. Listen, doesn't matter how many records they sold. This album, In Utero, is heavily inspired by noise rock. You can hear these atonal, dissonant guitars throughout many of the songs on the album. Kurt Cobain was really good at creating guitar feedback sounds, and you can really hear it on this album. Also, this album featured Pat Smear as well from The Germs. For this album, Nirvana was a 4-piece instead of a 3-piece. Dave Grohl's pounding drums, as always. Chris Novoselic's great bass guitar. And a lot of these songs are just really abrasive and kind of like a big FU to the record label, Geffen Records, to the public as a whole for making Kurt Cobain a celebrity. You can tell he was at his wit's end. He was losing his sanity. He was in the midst of his heroin addiction. He was in a bad marriage to Courtney Love. It seemed to all appearances that the couple wasn't getting along. The press was invading in his private life. They were intruding on his relationship and questioning whether he was a fit father for his child, Francis Bean Cobain. And all of the pressure of all the stuff that was going on definitely can be heard in the album In Utero. It's cathartic, it's noisy, it's heavy, it's experimental. It is not what the mainstream rock fans were expecting at the time. You know, when this album first came out, it was not received well. It was not considered to be as popular or as commercially successful as the predecessor, Nevermind, which obviously started the whole alternative rock revolution in the mainstream. In Utero was considered to be really difficult sounding. It wasn't until Kurt Cobain's untimely death that the album really took off. However, the album may be abrasive and gritty and noisy, but it does have some beautiful, timeless songs on it as well, such as Rape Me, Penny Royalty, Heart-Shaped Box, All Apologies. These are classic, beautiful, amazing Nirvana songs, but they're amidst a chaos of noise rock songs. The production of it's kind of gritty. I know Steve Albini was involved as one of the producers of the album. I think ultimately they used some of his mixing, but they went with another producer instead. However, you can hear his influence on the album. It's more raw sounding than Nevermind. And I think In Utero is a masterpiece and definitely belongs on this list as a noise rock album because it was a big FU to the whole music scene, to the record labels, to the public who expected Kurt Cobain to be this like larger than life rock star and just repeat himself, do the same thing he did on Nevermind. He refused to do that. In Utero is very uncompromising and it has a lot of guitar noise on it. So I'm definitely going to put In Utero as number 2 on my list of greatest noise rock albums. And I actually had the pleasure of visiting Kurt Cobain's old house where he wrote a lot of the In Utero album recently. I recorded some music for my own album in the backyard there. The house is abandoned and it's in the Hollywood Hills, and it was abandoned ever since Kurt Cobain lived there, and he wrote songs there in the closet. There's videos of him online writing songs in the closet, and I was literally in that house recording my album. My best friend passed away recently, but he was a huge Kurt Cobain fan, so I was able to take his acoustic guitar and record at that house up there in the hills. It was beautiful. If that house still exists, I highly recommend you go there. It's like a pilgrimage for any fan of Nirvana. It's an amazing place to go hang out, and you can go in the backyard. Technically, you are trespassing, but sometimes you got to do some wild shit for rock and roll, right? This brings me to my last album, number 1 of greatest noise rock albums of all time, is Velvet Underground and Nico. This album came out in 1967. Technically, it came out before the term noise rock even existed, but it doesn't matter to me. To me, this album invented noise rock. It was a pioneer of noise rock. It was produced famously by Andy Warhol. Andy Warhol kind of assembled the band. He told Lou Reed, "You're not good enough at singing, so we need Nico to be there with you." Nico was a beautiful German singer with an amazing voice. And to me, again, with this girl-guy thing going on, it's like a thing in noise rock where you have a couple or a girl and a guy singing and they kind of trade off. That formula was established here with the Velvet Underground and Nico. I don't like the Velvet Underground without Nico because to me, Lou Reed is a bad singer and he is kind of annoying as a vocalist. I think her female vocals add like a nice, beautiful counterpart to Lou Reed's nasally voice. Lou Reed obviously comes from that tradition of that beatnik tradition, like Bob Dylan type style, poetry vibes, and it works really well, but it's nice when it's offset by Nico. She has that husky, low female voice that's distinct and one of a kind with her heavy German accent. And of course, Nico would go on to reinvent herself as a solo artist in her own right. I think her solo albums are really highly underrated. She took the blonde hair that she was known for and she totally did a makeover. She got like heavy black eyeliner, dyed her hair all black. She kind of low-key invented the whole female goth songstress thing with her solo albums, The Marble Index, Desert Shore, and The End, which features a cover of The Doors song, The End. Famously, she apparently had some kind of relationship with Jim Morrison. Apparently, she said that Lou Reed and Andy Warhol attempted to suppress her solo career and kind of like snubbed her in the press and denied her any kind of opportunity to shine as a solo artist. Of course, Nico was also famously addicted to heroin for years and years. She finally got clean towards the end of her life, and then she died in a bicycle accident, tragically. She cracked her head open falling on her bike, but at least she finally overcame the addiction to heroin. So Nico definitely is a legend and belongs here in the noise rock pantheon of the greats of noise rock. Lou Reed, obviously a master in his own right, with the album Metal Machine Music, which kind of paved the way, definitely was the prototypical noise album. where he just laid a bunch of guitars on amps in a room and left the room, and they just like feedback on each other and created these walls of feedback, and it became kind of the template for noise music. And with them combined with John Cale, the experimental composer, playing his weird stringed instruments on this album, adding that kind of atonal noise element to the album that makes it a classic noise rock masterpiece. The song Venus in Furs famously has those spiky stringed instruments on it, and it's based on the novel by the same name, which talks about a female dominatrix who dresses all in leather and dominates men, and she can't respect a man because she can only dominate a man. And so that is kind of an early crossover between BDSM and rock and roll, which would go on to influence artists from Throbbing Gristle to David Bowie and so many others in the underground as well as in the mainstream. Also, you have Lou Reed's solo career that was produced later by David Bowie with hits like Walk on the Wild Side and stuff. So Lou Reed did it all. He did underground, fringe, and he did pop. So Lou Reed is definitely a legend of noise rock. And that's why this album, produced, of course, by Andy Warhol with the famous banana on the cover, an Andy Warhol art piece, is iconic. And this album is #1 noise rock history. Let me know what you guys think of my top 10 noise rock list. Are there albums you would have liked to see on here that weren't on here? Did you think I picked the wrong album by these artists? Should I have picked Daydream Nation instead of Bad Moon Rising by Sonic Youth, for instance? Did you feel like Melt Banana should have been higher on my list? Maybe you felt like I should have included the Melvins or My Bloody Valentine or other acts that you didn't feel like made my list. Now, I will do a shoegaze and a grunge video separately, so don't worry. You're going to hear more about the Melvins. You're going to hear more about My Bloody Valentine on those videos. But, you know, did you feel like those artists should have been included here? What did you think, and what would your top 10 noise rock albums be? Let me know in the comments. Like, subscribe, hit the bell icon for notifications to get updates as I post new videos. I will be continuing this series in my top 10, and I will be exploring other genres coming up. So stay tuned for that. And of course, as always, bombs away.